having me.
Absolutely. Okay, I was about to say we're recording this evening, so the
Cool.
announcement will make itself known, and it just
Okay.
did. Awesome. Well, Stacy, this is a very informal conversational chat that we're going to have for the next 30 minutes. And then after the recorded part, we're going to do a little Q&A with our readers, so they'll be able to have some extra follow-up questions then.
Okay.
awesome.
Sounds great.
Well, great. Well, Stacy, let's get started. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started writing, and about your doggy that I just heard in the background.
Was that him? My husband's keeping him occupied right now with peanut butter Kong, so he doesn't bark.
Perfect.
That's our trick. But so hi everyone. I'm Stacy Willingham. A Flicker in the Dark is my debut, and how did I get started writing? I have been writing pretty much my whole life. My sister, I have an older sister, she's 2.5 years older than me, and she actually taught me how to read and write when I was about 4 years old.
Oh,
I remember we used to spend like every waking second together. So when she was old enough to go to school and I still was not old enough, I would be really, really jealous. And then as soon as she got home, she would teach me like everything she learned that day. So she's actually kind of who I have to thank for all of this.
Oh, I love that.
So I grew up doing that. I started writing like little short stories and screenplays when I was a kid, like 6 years old. And then in high school, I had a high school English teacher who really made a pretty strong impression on me. That was the first time that I had ever read a book and like really analyzed it. I was always a huge reader, but I never thought like critically about books before until my junior year of high school. And that paired with being on my high school newspaper made me realize I wanted to write in some capacity. So for all through college and the first couple of years out of college, I was doing journalism and copywriting. And then I decided I wanted to give fiction a try just because I loved reading so much. And I realized pretty quickly that that's definitely what I love.
I love that. Do you remember what the first book you remember loving was?
Oh man, so many. As a kid, my parents, I just grew up in a family of readers. And my mom and I used to read together all the time. And I remember everything Roald Dahl I really loved, especially The Witches. And it's kind of, it's like a little bit of a creepy book for a kid. So I think it kind of makes sense that I grew up loving like creepy stuff, but everything Roald Dahl, but especially The Witches. I have a really vivid memory of reading that book with my mom when I was a kid, and it just kind of creeped me out, but like I never wanted to stop.
Oh, I love that. So I have to know more about this like sort of early enjoyment of being creeped out.
I think I have my whole family to thank for that. Like I mentioned, I used to write like screenplays and books and stuff when I was really little, when I was like 6. And I think a large part of that was, again, my sister. So I guess it was like the mid 90s, I'm 31. So in the mid 90s, I was like 8. And we used to take my parents' camcorder, like one of those kind of old school camcorders, and we would write like movie scripts and then take the camcorder out into the woods in my parents' backyard and act out like little movies. And one of the first movies we ever did was basically like our own version of oh my gosh, why am I blanking on it? You know that horror movie that they like have the camcorder in their face and they're like going through the woods?
Oh, Blair Witch, the Blair Witch Project.
Blair Witch Project. So when I was like 8, I was basically like creating my own version of the Blair Witch Project.
I love that.
Just like a little dark for a kid that young. Yeah. But I mean, my parents got me really into like Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock and Columbo, like kind of older mystery type of shows. And and then I think as I got a little bit older, I started watching like Dateline and Forensic Files and kind of more mature, scarier things. So I think it's just something we've always been interested in, kind of mysteries. It's what I grew up with. So I don't think that's so cool. Kind of what I always knew.
Well, and it makes it so easy to like, your family's probably so like excited about reading the books too, you know?
Yeah, it does. It definitely helps because They are still my first readers. They're my mom, my dad, my sister are the only three people I let read my first drafts. I don't even let like my husband look at it because
That's awesome.
they read the type of stuff that I write. So they're I don't think they can be totally objective because they just kind of like whatever I put out there, but they read enough in the genre to be able to give really good early feedback, which is yeah, it's appreciated.
Yeah, it's so helpful for sure. So what inspired A Flicker in the Dark?
Yeah, so I mentioned it was probably around in high school I started getting pretty into true crime. And it was also in high school, but mostly in college, I also started getting very interested in psychology. And I think being interested in both psychology and true crime led to a pretty clear fascination in criminal psychology specifically. So I started getting really interested in like why bad people do bad things, and things like nature versus nurture. Like, are you born bad, or are you created to be bad? And or do you learn to be bad through your upbringing and things like that? And because I've always been fascinated by that, or like I think in my last couple of years of college taking psychology classes, I started getting really interested in that. Serial killers to me were kind of like the ultimate mystery that could never really be solved. Like even if we solved their crimes, I don't think like real, like normal people can fully wrap their minds around, right? Like why they do the things that they do. So yeah, I watched like every documentary there is about serial killers, not so much to learn about their crimes, but to learn about like their pasts and their personal lives and their families. And like, I'm just so fascinated by like what could go so wrong. And I was watching one of those documentaries, and there were two pictures that kind of showed up on the screen. One was of Ted Bundy and his girlfriend, and they looked like a super normal couple just in love. Like they were sitting on the living room floor with like a fire in the background. It's a pretty famous picture. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like this poor woman had no idea, you know, they were living together and she had a kid and like she had no idea. And then another picture was Dennis Rader, he's also known as BTK, a picture of him walking his daughter down the aisle at her wedding.
So
and yeah, and it was just looking at those pictures and seeing the normalcy of it made me really think about how horrible it would be to be the family member of a serial killer, and specifically the daughter of a serial killer. Because if you had those moments with your father, like walking down the aisle, or really happy memories together in childhood, like how would you look back at those happy memories differently, knowing that he was actually not who you thought he was? So it was kind of a slow, like a seed of an idea that kind of grew over time. But once I decided I wanted to write from the point of view of the daughter of a serial killer, I just tried to put myself in her shoes the whole time and think, you know, if I was living this, like if this was my dad and I was living this, how would I react to all of these different scenarios?
Yeah. Well, and it's so, because it's just so crazy, like with Chloe's, like the fact that she's also just doing her own investigation, and truth is so important to her, for somebody who has to live in the shadow of lies and secrets because of the secrets her father was keeping for so long.
Yeah.
What is sort of her interest in her need for truth, for seeking out the truth and finding, like, you know, clearing people's names and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think she's traumatized by what happened to her in her past. And I think she also, it's not only like a quest for truth, but she also feels so much unresolved guilt over what happened in her past. And it's interesting, when I was doing research for the book, researching serial killers and their families, I came across a podcast that's hosted by the daughter of a serial killer called Happy Face. And it's very interesting. And she was talking a lot about how what she struggled with as an adult was thinking, basically, again, back to that nature versus nurture conversation, like, if I'm the descendant of someone so evil, how can I be good? And she just had a lot of like identity questions like that. So when I was thinking about Chloe wanting to find the truth, for me, I kind of was looking at it in two different ways. One was she feels guilty about her father's crimes in the past because with Lena, at least, she kind of brought her into the home and was, the reason why Lena was around her dad all the time. And, she was the very first, and it felt different than all the other ones. And she's kind of thinking like, okay, well, if I wasn't bringing this girl around and my dad didn't like act on these impulses, like would any of this had happened? So she feels that guilt. So she wants to, when it starts happening again, and it's again girls that she knows and that she's close to, that guilt kind of comes rushing back, and she feels the need to stop it again before it gets as far as it did the first time. But then I think there's also a little bit of that, like she wants so badly to be a good person because she feels that, she has a hard time trusting herself and her own instincts, but she really wants to do the right thing because she just kind of feels the need to prove to herself that she's a good person because she spent her whole life with a parent who she believed wasn't,
and wanting to be so different than that person,
right? Like she just wants to run in the opposite direction and do the exact opposite of what she thinks he would have done.
Absolutely. So I want to go a little bit, you mentioned just briefly a little bit about your research. What were some other interesting tidbits that you picked up while you were researching serial killers? We love talking about author research. So I'm always like, tell me your tidbits.
Yeah. It's funny. Like, I think since I was so interested in serial killers to begin with, my research process was almost like flip-flopped. Like I knew so much about them already. And then when I decided to write this book, I was just kind of digging deeper into certain topics. So I did a lot of research on like psychologists and like medication prescribing rules in Louisiana, because most psychologists can't prescribe medications. Usually that's only psychiatrists, but in Louisiana, as in a handful of other states, there's some special rules where if you go through special schooling, you can. And I wanted Chloe to be a psychologist because I really liked how, like, I think because my own interest in psychology, maybe I just kind of wanted her to be the type of person where she like knew what her clients should be doing, and she had a pretty good insight into their psyche, but she couldn't take the advice she was giving them. So I did a lot of research on that to make sure I was getting those facts right. I did a lot of research into things like PTSD because I wanted to make sure that I was portraying those emotions accurately. And that's where a lot of things like that podcast I mentioned came into play. I tried to read about and listen to, thankfully there's not a ton of people out there who have been in Chloe's situation, but there are, and so I wanted to make sure I was being fictional and not like basing the story off of anyone who's actually a real person, but listening to their stories and trying to at least take that into consideration, like the things they said they felt and the things that they said they did. And then I did a lot of research into psychopaths. So there's a couple books. Yeah, right. I know, it's creepy. Like there's a couple books called there's one called The Psychopath Test. It was really interesting. It kind of talks about like the key characteristics that most psychopaths have. And there's another one called The Sociopath Next Door. And it's a creepy one. It's pretty much about how many people out there in society like lack a conscience. And so I read a lot of those to try and make sure I was accurately portraying like a person who had those types of characteristics.
Oh, okay. I just added to my reading list.
They're good.
I need to add. So what are you working on next?
So I'm working on my second book right now. My editor actually has it. It's we've gone through a couple drafts, and I think it's moving into production actually, which means we're moving into like proofreading and copy edits, just little tweaks. So it's pretty close to done, which I can't even believe it. But it's another psychological thriller. So if you like to flicker in the dark, I hope you're gonna like this one too, because it's similar in a lot of ways. It's set in the South again, and the setting plays a pretty big role. I can tell you it's another past and present storyline between Savannah, Georgia, and Beaufort, South Carolina. So
Cool.
It's in the South, but it's moving a little bit closer to my side of the South, like over on the East Coast. And yeah, that's what I'm working on. It'll be out. I don't have a firm publication date yet, but probably in January. So a little less than a year.
Awesome. Yeah, that's actually a good point, because
Yeah.
I was thinking about the fact that you live in South Carolina, but the book is set in Louisiana. And like, I mean, we always think of like a nice Southern South, but it's like, yeah, how did you make that decision to not put it in your own backyard, to set it sort of farther away?
Yeah, I always knew I wanted it to be in the South. I think it's just easy to write, not easy, but I enjoy writing what I know. Just little things like when I walk outside, like the noises, the crickets, the cicadas, the humidity and the way the air feels. Like I know that so well. And so I like describing those sensations. But for some reason, when I was thinking about this story, like Charleston just didn't feel right to me. And I was thinking about other cities and other states. And that's the thing about the South is like, I always tell people who aren't from around here, I don't know where all of you guys are from. I think all over the place, but they're not the same. Like Louisiana is very different from South Carolina. And which is different from Mississippi, which is different from Florida. Like they're all very different and unique.
Absolutely.
And so you can't just kind of write about like the South as like a blanket, but there's parts that they all kind of share an experience. But I picked Louisiana for a couple different reasons. I wanted a very small Southern town where it had like an everybody knows everybody kind of feel. And Bro Bridge to me like embodied that perfectly, even down to the name. I mean, like the name Bro Bridge is a very Louisiana Southern name. And yeah, and I thought, like South is very unique, but Louisiana, like you can even hone it down even further, and Louisiana is extremely unique. They've got the bayous and the cypress trees and the crawfish, and it's just very it's a really cool place. So I chose Bro Bridge first, and then a small town where everybody knew everybody. It was in the South, and I loved the fact that it was the crawfish capital of the world. And I kind of I had that chapter, the crawfish festival chapter. Like the second I picked Louisiana, that chapter like came to me immediately, and I was like, oh my god, yeah! I was like, that's one of my favorite chapters to write. I just thought it was a really cool setting. And then Baton Rouge was more of a statistic or logistical decision. I needed a bigger city within driving distance of Bro Bridge, like far enough away that Chloe felt removed from her past, but close enough that it was still really just like an hour or two away. And I always wanted her within a close enough proximity to Angola, which is where her dad was in prison, because someone once just described her father to me as like an off the page antagonist. Like he's not ever really in the book in the present storyline, but he's always kind of like hovering over her shoulder. And I thought it was shake him. Totally. Yeah. And I thought just the fact that like she, for 20 years was trying to run from her father and, pretend that he was dead. And, but really he was just like an hour and a half away. Like he was never that far away at all. So, yeah, long-winded answer, but I had a lot of wheels spinning when it came to the setting and picking like the exact spots. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, the second one will be a little bit closer to home, and I already have an idea for my third one that I think will probably be in Charleston. So I'm
you're getting there.
Yeah, I'm making my way back home.
I love it. But you're so right. Like we have members in our book club from all over the South, from Texas, Louisiana, Florida. So we're definitely understand that every single state is like has its own personality.
Yes, they're all so different. And that's what I love. I love it. Like, and there's so many Southern authors, like, Greg Iles writes very Mississippi, and S.A. Cosby writes like, kind of dark Southern noir, and none of them feel the same because they're set in different parts of the South, and it's just not the same.
Absolutely. That's great. So I know that this is a, debut novel and but you are a marketing person as well. I saw your, I saw your background. So I know you're thinking about where you want to be in your next 5 to 10 years. Do you see yourself as like a Southern mystery writer? Is that where you want to be on that sort of pedestal, that sort of category in that space?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like I write books set in the South because I just love writing those descriptions so much. It's funny, the A Flicker in the Dark, while it's my debut, it's not the first book I've ever written. I actually wrote a book before A Flicker in the Dark that I failed to ever get published, and that was set in Chicago. And and it was because I actually spent a couple years living in Chicago, and it was like almost the exact opposite of A Flicker in the Dark when it comes to setting. It was cold and snowy and really bleak and gray. And I don't know. I mean, when I think about like my experience writing that and my experience writing A Flicker in the Dark, I just got so much more immersed in writing A Flicker in the Dark. And I think the setting had a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
And so I felt the same way with my second book. I mean, I really, really enjoyed writing my second book, and I have ideas for my next couple too, and I just keep getting drawn back to the South. So I don't know, I don't necessarily want to put myself in a box and say like I'll never write anywhere else, but having tried to write in a setting that's not down here, I just don't think I did it quite as well.
So before you joined us, we were doing our little mix and mingle with our readers where we all talk about what we're reading, watching, and listening to. So I'd love to hear if you have any things that any pop culture or entertainment you've been enjoying that you'd like to recommend to our group.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually reading this right now, 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. I love Peter Swanson. I've always loved his books, but this one might be my favorite of his so far. It's really, really good. And I think it's because I mentioned I grew up loving like Alfred Hitchcock and Agatha Christie, and he makes a lot of references to old like 30s, 40s, 50s type of murder mystery books. It's really good. My husband and I are on, I think it's season 4 of Yellowstone. I don't know if anyone's been watching Yellowstone, but yeah, I see someone clapping. Yeah, we love Yellowstone. I'm really excited to get into the next season of Ozark. We haven't started it yet, but we're into Ozark. I feel like there's an abundance of good TV on right now. We just finished the new Dexter. We love all that stuff.
I love that. Can you read in your genre while you're writing?
Yeah. It's funny. I do try to read broadly. Mostly thrillers and mysteries just because I find them the most entertaining personally, but I always try to pepper in. Yeah, exactly. The stories I love to read are the ones that I love to write. But I always try to pepper in other genres too, just to make sure I'm reading all kinds of things. So I read memoirs and nonfiction, and I like historical fiction. I like World War II historical fiction quite a bit. But yeah, I think every author has their own very unique voice and style. So I've never had an issue with getting like confused, while reading a thriller, while writing a thriller. They feel very separate to me for some reason.
Awesome. I love that. So before I turn this over to our readers, how can readers stay in touch with you and find out more about you online?
Yeah, so my website is stacywillingham.com, and it has pretty much everything on there. It's got book news. It has a newsletter sign up, even though I admittedly have probably sent 2 newsletters out in my life. So like I don't really do much with it, but on occasion I will. So if you want that, you can sign up. And then that has all my social media links too, but I'm probably most active on Instagram. It's Stacy V Willingham. And as Gwen mentioned, I post pictures of my dog on there all the time. And then I'm on Twitter, SV Willingham, and then Facebook. It's I think it's facebook.com/Stacy Willingham author. It's just an author page. So those are the main ones. But yeah, again, Instagram's the one I'm on the most for sure.
I love it. Awesome. Okay. Well, Stacy, before I turn this over to the readers, final question. What is the creepiest place you have ever visited?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. And I think the answer is there is a haunted prison here in Charleston, and it's actually rumored to be where the very first female serial killer was put to death. I cannot remember her name, but it was here in Charleston, in downtown Charleston, and it's a creepy place. And they definitely they do these tours, and they definitely play it up for sure. I mean, they like walk you around and turn the lights off and stuff like that. But it's pretty well maintained for it being as old as it is, and you can go into the actual like jail cells and stuff. And yeah, I was in there for an hour. I think a couple Halloweens ago, my husband and I went, and it was like the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. It was a very creepy place. Yeah.
That sounds awesome and horrifying all at the same time.
Yeah. I don't know if I would go back, but it was a cool experience.
Awesome. Well, Stacy, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and end our recording now.
Thank you. Okay.